welcome to the next episode of Limitless, the podcast that is making the impossible possible. I'm Alex, and today I'm going to be talking to you about something we all experience from time to time, or perhaps a lot of the time, and which can end up ruling our choices when it shouldn't. Today, we're talking about fear. If you are going to be making a change in the world, stepping out and doing something different to those around you, or something which you've never done before, fear will be sure to show its face. Whilst this is to be expected, and as we will learn, actually very necessary in life, it doesn't mean it should overrule all your good ideas and be the driver for your decisions. So, firstly, let's talk a bit about your emotions. Fear is one of the basic emotions that it is commonly agreed we humans feel. There are others, although we can't quite agree on how many, but they include happiness, sadness, anger, and disgust. These basic emotions are sparked in the automatic response part of our brains, the amygdala, so we don't choose to feel them. And at various points in our lifetime, when we felt one of these basic emotions, we developed a behaviour pattern to respond to this emotion, which suited the situations we were in or the people we hung around with. Let's take an example from when children are first born. It's really useful to look at emotions in babies because they're such a basic form of human at that point. They haven't had the chance to develop very complex brains yet, so it's a clear path from emotion to behaviour. Okay, so a baby gets hungry, which they'll probably feel in their bodies as mild discomfort. This triggers the sadness or fear emotion in them, and one of our brain's inbuilt behaviour responses to this is crying. So the baby cries, and mum or dad come along and give the baby some food, and then a neural pathway is fired in its brain that says discomfort, that's the physical feeling, equals sadness, that's the emotion, equals crying, that's the behaviour, which equals food, the result. So this will cement this behaviour response that when they're hungry, they cry, and then they get food. Hence why we get crying babies. Now, fast forward to adulthood and emotions get far more complex. We've spent many years developing a complex set of emotional responses to various physical feelings or external stimuli, and then an even more complex set of behaviour responses to these emotions to get the results we want, or in some cases, to get a result which served us at some point in our lives, but may not anymore. You may now, as an adult, feel the physical feelings of hunger like you did as a baby, but your emotions and behaviour in response to this physical sensation will probably have changed. Perhaps you feel happy because you know you've got a delicious lunch in the fridge, which you've been looking forward to, and now hunger tells you it's nearly lunchtime. Perhaps you feel fear because you don't like how your body looks and you've attributed that to what you eat. Or perhaps you feel angry because you can't get the food you want that will satisfy you. And then what you do in response to this emotional reaction may well have changed too. You probably won't cry anymore because, well, you're an adult and crying for food generally doesn't get you food nowadays. Instead, you may walk to the fridge to get your lunch, or yell at someone who will fetch you some food, or possibly avoid food altogether if we have a fear around it. Our physical feelings or external stimuli create emotions, and these emotions are there to tell us to do something, enact behaviours, which our brain at some point thought would help us. Except it doesn't always help us. Unfortunately, our brains don't always catch up to the news that the emotions and behaviours we learnt when we were kids are no longer very helpful as an adult. So where we learnt to fear certain things as a child, authority, failure, talking to strangers, spiders, this might not be helpful or may even hold us back as an adult. Say, as a small child, you had strict parents and learnt that not doing what you were told by someone who was senior in age or status was bad and you would get punished. This probably made you feel fear, the emotion, around certain authority figures, and perhaps made you exhibit certain behaviours such as saying yes to everything they asked of you, or checking and double-checking everything you did, or becoming overly obsessed with keeping your spaces clean. Whilst this kept you safe and unpunished as a child, as an adult, this might become much less useful. The behaviours might start to look like sacrificing your own time and energy for everyone else, not setting clear boundaries, not being able to speak up for yourself at work, or developing compulsions in certain scenarios. Our brains have morphed this behaviour into adulthood where it no longer serves us and hasn't managed to unlearn this behaviour. So, what is fear? In the moment, it may feel like a really compelling reason to act, or not act, in a particular way. But fear is actually a learned response, one that we might need to upgrade now that we're no longer children. It is simply the body's way of trying to communicate with us based on what it has seen and done in the past. And the way to move past fear is to retrain your brain to perform a new behaviour when it feels afraid, because the old behaviour doesn't serve us anymore. I have been fearful about a lot of things in my life. I fear jumping from heights. I fear people thinking less of me if I speak my opinions. I fear annoying people. I fear being boring. I also used to fear spiders, but I don't anymore. I was always afraid of spiders, ever since I was a young kid. I don't remember having a significantly bad experience with a spider, but you often don't with childhood fears. One time, in my mid-20s, I saw a spider run into the complicated underneath bit of our ironing board. I never could just leave a spider where it was, because then I wouldn't know where it ended up. So I spent about 45 minutes trying to fish out this harmless, medium-sized spider and catch it in a glass. For the sake of those not in the UK, a medium-sized spider for me is really not that big, maybe 2 to 3 centimetres across. After much effort, screaming and shaking, I took it outside and dropped it down a drain, poor little spider, and then went back inside and promptly went into shock. I was dizzy, went pale, shaking, felt sick, the lot. The interesting thing to note here is, as I'm sure you're aware, I was never in any danger whatsoever. But my brain obviously decided that I had diced on the edge of death for a moment. A few years later, I watched a TED Talk by a favourite author and coach of mine called Michael Neal. He talked about a time when he was working with some people for a live stage show where he was going to help them overcome their fear of spiders. And in the practice run of the show, they became fearful of the point where there would be live spiders on stage, even though the spiders weren't actually there. Michael said he found it fascinating because their brains were literally creating a fear response around something that they perceived as dangerous, even though the spiders weren't dangerous, and at that point, they didn't even exist. Michael Neal actually tells a wonderful story about the thoughts and emotions our brain creates. It goes something like this. Imagine if we live in a world of big, scary, terrifying dragons. Dragons that hurt us or scare us, and that we spend our lives running away from, or fighting, or building walls around ourselves to protect us. And if the dragons get to us and scratch us, we have to eat or drink or numb ourselves in some way to deal with the dragon scratches. Now, imagine if one day you wake up and you realise that this whole time the dragons weren't actually real. The dragons were your mind creating thoughts that you felt you had to run away from, but were actually a figment of your imagination. How would you behave differently? Now, you may be thinking that whatever creates a fear emotion within you is definitely not imaginary, although it might be. However, the feeling and emotion behind it is created inside your brain. And if our brain created it, our brain can create a different reaction, or perhaps choose not to create the dragon at all. Perhaps we have a bit more control over it than we thought. I let spiders live in my house now. When my daughter came along, my husband and I decided we didn't want to pass our fear of spiders on to our daughter, so we chose to not ever show her our fear of them, and instead change our behaviour and reaction to them. It was hard at first, but over the past 8 years, from changing our behaviour around spiders, not freaking out when we see them, looking at them, really trying to understand them and what they're doing, we have managed to rewire our brains so that we don't actually fear them anymore. I see them and let them be. Sometimes I even pick them up and put them outside. I've sat and watched them with my daughter as they go about their business. We watch videos and read books about them. When I think back to the fear I felt that day when I put the spider outside, or in many previous times when I've not slept at night because there was a spider in the room, it's amazing to think where I am now. And it turns out my daughter absolutely loves all bugs, so we'll play with spiders and keep them as pets, which may never have happened if we hadn't managed to train ourselves into a new way of reacting to fear. Today, I want you to think about a fear that is holding you back from something. It can be small or big. Think about, or preferably write down, what the thing or situation is that makes you fearful. Then, think or write the behaviours or reactions that come from that fear. Perhaps your palms become sweaty, you shake, you avoid eye contact. Maybe you avoid doing something you want to do, or you lash out and say mean things to people. Whatever happens in that moment of fear, write down or have the list in your mind. Now, think about the result those behaviours cause. Maybe you have to go to the effort of finding someone else to move a spider outside for you. Perhaps you upset someone you love. Or maybe you miss an opportunity you really wanted to make the most of. Okay, now it's time to rewrite this. Go back to the behaviours and reactions list and rewrite it. There are things you may not be able to change, like your shaking hands or the swell of anger in your chest, but there are behaviours you can find a new way to counter. Instead of yelling at someone, maybe you take a few deep breaths and go for a 5-minute fast walk. Maybe instead of avoiding eye contact, you make an effort to look at someone directly and smile. These are behaviours you can change, however fearful you are, and they may take practice, but the more you practice, the more your brain will understand that this is the new behaviour to respond with when you feel that fear emotion. And in this way, we can see fear more as a marker for something in life that has challenged us and that we've overcome, instead of something which is stopping us taking our place in the world. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Limitless, the podcast that is making the impossible possible. I hope you've managed to see the possibility today of something changing in your life, because fear so often holds us back. If you have, I'd love for you to come share it with me in the Patreon community. Come find me at www.patreon.com/limitlesscommunity, and I'll speak to you in the next episode. If you're interested in finding out more about Michael Neal, who I can honestly say changed my life and my outlook forever, I would highly recommend his TED Talk titled Why Aren't We Awesomer? And his book, The Inside Out Revolution. He's got all sorts of other stuff out there, books, podcasts, online classes, the lot. So if you like him, you'll have plenty of stuff to keep you entertained.